Hey everyone, take a close look at this Lincoln Wheat cent. Because what seems like an ordinary old penny can hide details that serious collectors examine very carefully. Stay with me as we uncover what makes certain examples truly stand out. Step 1. The 1940 Lincoln Wheat cent looks, at first glance, like one of the countless old pennies that disappeared into cash registers, dresser drawers, cigar boxes, and family collections decades ago. But this small copper coin carries a much more complicated story than its modest appearance suggests, and the difference between an ordinary worn example and an exceptional survivor can be enormous. By the time we reach the end of this investigation, we'll examine what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction, why some 1940 cents remain inexpensive despite their age, and which combination of mint, color, grade, strike, surface quality, rarity, and authenticity can transform an otherwise familiar wheat cent into a serious collector piece. To understand why the 1940 cent matters, you have to place it in the America that produced it. The United States was living under the shadow of World War II, even though the country had not yet entered the conflict. Europe was already at war, American industry was expanding, and the nation was moving through the final years of the Great Depression. The Lincoln cent was already more than 3 decades old, having debuted in 1909 to commemorate the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth. In 1940, the familiar wheat reverse remained unchanged. Two stylized wheat ears framed the denomination and inscriptions, creating one of the most recognizable designs in American coinage. The cent was still a workhorse denomination, intended to move through everyday commerce rather than sit untouched in collections, which is precisely why finding one today with exceptional original surfaces can be much harder than the enormous mintage figures might suggest. The Philadelphia Mint struck the largest portion of the 1940 production, with approximately 586.8 million cents made without a mint mark. Denver contributed 81.39 million pieces bearing the small d, while San Francisco produced 112.94 million carrying the s. Those numbers immediately reveal something important about rarity. The 1940 Philadelphia issue is not scarce simply because it is old, and neither the Denver nor San Francisco issue should automatically be considered rare merely because it carries a mint mark. In fact, millions upon millions of these coins entered circulation. The real scarcity begins when collectors narrow the search by condition. A heavily circulated 1940 cent can still be encountered without much difficulty, but an example retaining strong original mint color, clean fields, sharp details, and virtually no distracting marks belongs to a very different category. Physically, the coin follows the classic specifications of the pre-1982 Lincoln cent. It weighs about 3.11 grams, measures 19 millimeters across, and has a plain edge. Its alloy is approximately 95% copper with the remaining 5% composed of tin and zinc. That composition is important because copper is chemically reactive, and the color of a Lincoln cent can change dramatically as the coin ages. A newly struck cent could display brilliant reddish-orange surfaces, but decades of exposure to oxygen, moisture, handling, storage materials, and environmental contaminants can turn that surface brown. Collectors therefore pay close attention not only to numerical grade, but also to the coin's color designation. A certified Lincoln cent may be classified brown, red-brown, or red, with the red designation generally reserved for coins that retain the overwhelming majority of their original mint color. That distinction can have a profound effect on desirability and price. The artistry of the 1940 cent also deserves a closer look. Victor David Brenner's portrait of Abraham Lincoln dominates the obverse, with Liberty positioned to the left and the date directly beneath the portrait. In God We Trust arches across the upper portion of the design. On the reverse, two wheat ears surround the inscriptions 1 cent and United States of America, while EPLURIBUS UNUM stretches across the upper portion. Brenner's initials, VDB, had originally created controversy when the Lincoln cent debuted, but by 1940 they were no longer present on the reverse. The famous oversized initials had been removed early in the series. What collectors see in 1940 is therefore a mature version of a design that had already become deeply embedded in American culture. Every detail, from Lincoln's hair to the wheat lines, can become evidence when judging the quality of an individual specimen. The production process explains why two coins from the same year can look dramatically different. Copper planchets were prepared to the proper specifications, fed into coining presses, and struck between dies carrying the obverse and reverse designs. Ideally, the metal flowed evenly into every recess of the dies, creating crisp lettering and well-defined devices. But dies experienced wear, pressure, and repeated use, and planchets could vary in preparation and surface quality. Striking pressure also mattered. As a result, collectors examine the sharpness of Lincoln's hair, the lettering, the wheat ears, and the overall separation between design elements. A coin can have an attractive grade but still lose some appeal if the strike is soft or if important details are less distinct than expected. On the other hand, a sharply struck example with clean, original surfaces can become particularly desirable when combined with a high numerical grade and attractive color. This is where collector value begins to separate itself from simple age. A circulated 1940 cent may be interesting primarily as a historical artifact, while a problem-free uncirculated specimen can become a much more serious collectible. Recent auction evidence demonstrates just how wide that range can be. For example, a certified 1940 Philadelphia cent graded MS-67 red sold for $195.20 in June 2026, showing that even a superb gem example does not automatically command thousands. Another MS-67 red Philadelphia example brought $207 in a 2012 Heritage auction, while a later MS-67 plus red PCGS example with CAC approval reached $480 in 2022. These sales illustrate an essential rule of numismatics: a one-point difference, exceptional eye appeal, certification quality, and the exact circumstances of a sale can change the outcome dramatically. The Denver issue provides an even clearer lesson. Although its mintage of 81.39 million was far below Philadelphia's output, mintage alone does not tell the entire rarity story. A 1940 D cent in ordinary circulated condition can be affordable, while a truly elite example with blazing original red color and outstanding surfaces can attract aggressive bidding. One certified MS-67 plus red 1940D with CAC approval sold for $3,120 in 2018, largely because it represented an unusually high-end example for the date and mint, and the market has continued to demonstrate the ceiling for exceptional pieces. PCGS records a 1940D MS-68 red example selling for $10,800 in January 2025. That is not a normal value for a 1940D cent. It is evidence of what can happen when condition reaches an extraordinary level. Another 1940D MS-67 red NGC example sold for only $75 in 2024, showing why the phrase 1940D penny by itself tells you almost nothing about the final value. San Francisco produced 112.94 million 1940 cents, placing its output between Philadelphia and Denver. Again, the S is significant, but it is not a magic symbol that turns every coin into a rare treasure. A certified 1940 SMS-67 red PCGS example sold for $104 in February 2025, while an older auction record for another MS-67 red piece was considerably different. The lesson is that market demand moves with grade, certification, timing, appearance, and the number of serious collectors pursuing the same coin. Registry set competition can be especially important at the upper end, where collectors are no longer simply searching for a 1940S. They may be searching for a finest known or nearly finest known example. That tiny distinction can turn a common date into a highly competitive condition rarity. Color is one of the most misunderstood elements of copper coin collecting, and the 1940 cent is an excellent example. Brown does not mean bad, and red does not automatically mean valuable. A beautiful brown coin with smooth original surfaces can be more desirable than an artificially brightened piece that has been chemically altered. Red-brown coins occupy the middle ground, retaining some original copper color while showing natural toning. Fully red examples are particularly prized when the color is original and accompanied by strong luster. Professional graders inspect the entire coin rather than simply looking for a bright orange appearance. Artificially cleaned, recolored, lacquered, or chemically treated cents can receive details designations or otherwise lose substantial market appeal. This is why collectors should never attempt to improve an old copper penny with household chemicals, polishing compounds, abrasive cloths, or aggressive cleaning methods. The grading process itself is another major dividing line. A circulated coin might fall somewhere in the fine, very fine, extremely fine, or about uncirculated range depending on the amount and location of wear. Once a coin reaches mint state, the grading scale becomes much more demanding. MS-60 through MS-70 represents coins that show no circulation wear, but the difference between an MS-64 and an MS-67 can be enormous because graders scrutinize contact marks, carbon spots, luster, strike, planchet quality, and overall eye appeal. At the very highest levels, a microscopic flaw can prevent a coin from reaching the next grade. This explains why a 1940 cent that looks brand new to the casual observer might be worth far less than a truly elite certified specimen. In copper collecting, preservation of original color is another critical factor, making an untouched red coin with pristine surfaces particularly difficult to locate. There are also errors and dye varieties that can change the equation, but this is where caution becomes essential. A genuine mint error is fundamentally different from damage that happened after the coin left the mint. Off-center strikes, wrong planchet strikes, clips, major dye problems, and other dramatic production abnormalities can command premiums when they are clearly attributable to the minting process and professionally authenticated. Heritage records also document an unusual 1940 cent struck on a brass planchet, an example that demonstrates why unusual metal composition deserves serious investigation rather than an instant assumption of rarity. A suspicious color, strange weight, altered edge, or unusual appearance should be tested and examined carefully, because counterfeiters and postman alterations exist. A legitimate error should ideally be certified by a respected grading service, especially when substantial money is involved. Authentication begins with the fundamentals: date, mint mark, weight, diameter, metal characteristics, surfaces, design details, and dye diagnostics. A precision scale should show a coin close to its expected 3.11 gram specification, while a caliper can verify the 19 millimeter diameter, but measurements alone cannot prove authenticity. Collectors should inspect the lettering for unnatural shapes, examine the rim for evidence of tooling, look for suspicious surface texture, and compare the coin with known genuine examples. Magnification can reveal scratches, tooling, altered mint marks, artificial color, or other signs of manipulation. If the coin appears to have a major error or seems valuable enough to justify professional grading, the safest route is examination by a recognized authentication and grading service. A certified holder also provides a documented grade and establishes a much stronger foundation for an auction or private sale than an unsupported claim of rarity. Preservation is equally important because every careless touch can potentially reduce the value of an old copper cent. Hold the coin by its edges, avoid rubbing the surfaces, and never clean it simply because it looks dark. Copper naturally changes color, and original toning can be part of the coin's character. For long-term storage, Collectors generally favor inert holders or professionally certified slabs rather than soft materials that can contain damaging chemicals or plasticizers. Keep the coin away from excessive humidity, heat, direct sunlight, and unstable environments. If a 1940 cent is already certified, leaving it in its original holder is usually preferable to opening it without a compelling reason. For raw coins, archival quality storage designed for numismatics is a much safer choice than ordinary household containers. Ultimately, the 1940 Lincoln Wheat cent is valuable precisely because it teaches us not to confuse age with rarity. Hundreds of millions were produced across Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and countless examples survived. Yet the population of coins that combine exceptional preservation, original red color, sharp strikes, clean surfaces, high certified grades, and strong collector appeal is dramatically smaller. The difference can mean an ordinary example worth little more than a modest collectible premium, a superb specimen bringing a few $100s, or an elite condition rarity moving into the thousands. The most extraordinary certified examples can go far beyond the commonly imagined range, including the remarkable 1940 Philadelphia MS-68 red record of $14,950 and the 1940D MS-68 red result of $10,800. Those numbers belong to extraordinary coins, not ordinary 1940 pennies. And that is what makes the 1940 Lincoln Wheat cent such an intriguing piece of American numismatic history. Its story begins with a country standing on the edge of a transformed world, continues through millions of copper cents that pass through ordinary American hands, and ends today in the highly specialized world of grading, certification, auction competition, and condition rarity. If you encounter one, the date alone is only the beginning of the investigation. Determine whether it is Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. Study the color, evaluate the wear, inspect the strike, weigh it accurately, search for legitimate varieties or errors, and if the evidence suggests something exceptional, have it authenticated before assigning a major value to it. The 1940 cent proves that rarity is not always hidden in a low mintage. Sometimes it is hidden in preservation. And sometimes the most important discovery is simply realizing that the ordinary-looking penny in front of you deserves a much closer examination. Step 2, the 1954 D. Lincoln Wheat cent is the kind of coin that can fool you precisely because it looks so ordinary. More than 7 decades after it left the Denver Mint, millions of these small copper cents have survived. Yet collectors have learned that the difference between an everyday circulated example and an extraordinary survivor can be dramatic. The little d beneath the date is only the beginning of the investigation. The real story is hidden in the coin's surfaces, color, strike, preservation, die characteristics, and certification. As we follow this 1954 descent from the American economy of the mid-1950s into today's collecting market, we'll uncover exactly what makes particular examples desirable, how professional graders separate ordinary pieces from condition rarities, and what authenticated auction results reveal about the upper end of this coin's collector potential. The year 1954 arrived during a fascinating period in American history. World War II had ended less than a decade earlier. The United States was entering the Cold War era, and the Korean War had concluded the previous year with an armistice. President Dwight D. Eisenhower was in the White House. American manufacturing remained powerful, and consumer life was changing rapidly as automobiles, televisions, household appliances, and suburban communities became increasingly important parts of post-war America. The Lincoln cent was still performing its original practical role, carrying small amounts of purchasing power through millions of daily transactions. There was nothing ceremonial about the 1954 D cent when it was struck. It was money intended to circulate. That makes its survival in pristine condition particularly interesting, because every uncirculated example escaped the ordinary journey of being exchanged, dropped, carried in pockets, and eventually worn down by decades of commerce. Denver struck 251,552,500 Lincoln cents, dated 1954, making the issue substantial rather than conventionally scarce. The D mint mark identifies the Denver Mint, while Philadelphia cents of the same year carried no mint mark. The number itself is an important warning against one of the most common mistakes in coin collecting, assuming that an old date automatically means rarity. More than 250 million 1954 D cents were produced, and the issue is considered common in circulated grades. PCGS research describes the date as very common in circulation and notes that even original rolls have existed, although they have become harder to locate. The picture changes as grade increases. MS-64 examples can still be found with relative frequency. MS-65 becomes more selective. MS-66 is scarce. And MS-66 plus or MS-67 specimens become dramatically more difficult to locate. In other words, the rarity of the 1954 D is driven much more by condition than by the original production figure. Physically, this cent follows the classic specifications of the Lincoln Wheat series. It weighs approximately 3.11 grams, measures 19 millimeters in diameter, and has a plain edge. Its composition is 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, an alloy that gives the coin its familiar warm copper appearance and also creates an important collecting characteristic: copper changes. Freshly struck surfaces can display brilliant original red coloration, but exposure to air, moisture, chemicals, handling, and storage conditions can gradually transform that color into reddish-brown or deeper brown tones. This is why collectors and grading services distinguish among brown, red-brown, and red examples. Two coins with identical dates and mint marks can therefore look completely different after 70 years. One may be dark and heavily circulated, another may retain attractive reddish-brown surfaces, while a third may preserve much of its original mint-red appearance. Those differences are not merely cosmetic. In the upper grades, they can have a substantial influence on collector demand. The design itself connects the 1954 D directly to one of America's most enduring coinage traditions. Victor David Brenner created the Lincoln portrait that first appeared on the cent in 1909, and by 1954 his design had already become a familiar part of American life. On the obverse, Lincoln faces right, with Liberty positioned to the left, the date beneath the portrait, and "In God We Trust" spanning the upper portion of the coin. Turn it over and the famous wheat reverse appears. Two wheat ears frame the central inscriptions 1 cent and United States of America, while EPLURIBUS UNUM occupies the upper area. The wheat design was more than decoration. It represented agriculture and the nation's productive foundation, while Lincoln's portrait connected the denomination with the president associated with preserving the Union and ending slavery. By 1954, however, the design was approaching the final chapter of its long life. The wheat reverse would disappear after 1958, when the Lincoln Memorial Reverse was introduced. Behind that familiar appearance was a highly organized industrial process. Copper alloy planchets had to be prepared to the correct dimensions before entering the coining presses, where tremendous pressure forced the metal into the recesses of the obverse and reverse dies. The quality of the finished coin depended on the condition of the dies, the planchet, the striking pressure, and other production variables. That is why collectors examine details rather than simply asking whether a coin looks new. On a high-grade 1954 D, Lincoln's hair should show strong definition, the lettering should be crisp, and the wheat ears on the reverse should retain impressive detail. Luster is another crucial clue. Original mint luster creates a distinctive reflective quality that tends to move across the surface as the coin is tilted under light. A coin can be technically uncirculated, yet have unattractive surfaces, dullness, spots, or distracting marks. Conversely, a sharply struck example with clean fields, vibrant luster, An excellent eye appeal can become much more desirable than its basic grade might suggest. That brings us to the central question collectors eventually ask: how much can one be worth? The answer depends heavily on where the coin sits on the grading scale. A circulated 1954D generally does not approach the kind of values associated with major Lincoln cent rarities. Even many certified mint state pieces trade at relatively modest levels. Auction records illustrate the difference. PCGS records a 1954D graded MS65 red by NGC selling for $15 in a 2014 Heritage Internet auction, while another MS66 red NGC example sold for $19 that same general period. These results demonstrate that simply possessing an uncirculated-looking 1954D does not make it a four-figure coin. A collector evaluating one might reasonably find examples in the tens of dollars, while stronger pieces can move into higher territory depending on grade, certification, color, originality, and buyer interest. The important point is that age provides the historical foundation, but condition determines much of the financial story. The landscape changes when the coin reaches the upper end of the grading scale. A verified 1954D Lincoln cent graded MS67 red by NGC brought $141 at Heritage Auctions in July 2012, and another MS67 red NGC example realized $204 in August 2020. A PCGS MS67 red specimen sold for $1,293 at Heritage's Long Beach Signature Auction in June 2013. That spread is extremely revealing. These are not different dates, not different mintages, and not different denominations. They are all 1954D Lincoln cents. Yet the marketplace produced dramatically different results because certification, holder, timing, eye appeal, and competition can all influence an individual sale. This is why assigning a single value to the date is misleading. A strong coin might be discussed in the hundreds, while a particularly desirable certified specimen could enter the $1,000 range, and exceptional condition rarities can climb considerably higher. At the very top, the 1954D becomes a genuine condition rarity. PCGS records an MS67 Plus red example selling for $7,638 at Heritage Auctions on February 1, 2015. That figure should immediately be placed in context. It does not mean that an ordinary 1954D cent is worth thousands of dollars, and it certainly does not mean every coin with a D beneath the date belongs in that category. The auction result reflects an exceptionally high-grade, authenticated coin, occupying a rare position at the top of the condition scale. PCGS currently lists MS67 Plus red as the top grade represented for the regular 1954D issue, with its population and survival data emphasizing how sharply the available population contracts as quality rises. PCGS also estimates that examples in MS67 are very scarce, with possibly fewer than 100 known, while MS66 Plus pieces are considerably harder to locate than MS66 coins. That is the essence of condition rarity. The original mintage can be enormous, yet the number surviving at an elite grade can be surprisingly small. Collectors also need to understand that the 1954D has more to investigate than just the regular date and mintmark combination. PCGS catalogs a repunched mintmark variety and a specific 1954D RPM designated FS501. On a genuine repunched mintmark, remnants of an earlier mintmark impression can appear around the primary D, reflecting the historical method by which mintmarks were applied to working dies during this era. These varieties are legitimate areas of specialized study, but they require careful attribution because random marks, scratches, die damage, or circulation abuse can resemble something unusual to an inexperienced eye. PCGS lists brown, red-brown, and red versions of the repunched mintmark varieties, demonstrating that even within a recognized variety, condition and color remain relevant. Auction records for varieties should also be treated independently from the ordinary issue, because a varieties market depends on recognition, rarity, attribution, grade, and collector specialization, rather than simply the presence of a strange-looking mint mark. Mint errors require the same level of discipline. A genuine error is created during the manufacturing process, not by damage that occurs after the coin enters circulation. Off-center strikes, clips, broad strikes, wrong planchet errors, and other abnormalities can be collectible when their characteristics clearly demonstrate a mint origin. But the 1954D should not be treated as a treasure hunt, where every unusual mark represents an error. A bent rim, gouge, flattened lettering, corrosion, machine damage, or altered surface is not automatically a mint mistake. Authentication becomes especially important when a supposed error would carry a large premium. The same principle applies to counterfeit awareness. Check the basic specifications, compare the coin with confirmed examples, examine the mint mark and lettering under magnification, and look for unnatural surfaces or signs of tooling. A scale reading close to 3.11 grams and a diameter near 19 millimeters are useful screening tools, but neither measurement by itself proves authenticity. For a coin that appears to be an important variety or high-grade rarity, professional certification is the safest foundation for a serious valuation. Grading a 1954D properly means looking beyond shine and color. A circulated coin displays measurable wear on Lincoln's highest points and the reverse design, while an about uncirculated piece may retain considerable detail but show slight friction on the highest surfaces. Mint state coins have no wear from circulation, but the MS-60, MS-70 scale becomes increasingly demanding as the number rises. At MS-65, collectors begin expecting strong overall quality. At MS-66, surface marks become increasingly important. At MS-67, the coin must be exceptional in preservation, luster, strike, and eye appeal. The red designation adds another layer because copper must retain substantial original coloration. A bright orange-looking coin is not automatically red if its surfaces have been chemically altered or otherwise manipulated. Cleaning is particularly dangerous. Never polish a 1954D, rub it with a cloth, soak it in household chemicals, or attempt to make a dark coin look new. Such treatment can permanently damage originality and reduce its desirability. For storage, use inert archival quality holders or professional slabs, handle the coin by its edges, and protect it from humidity, heat, direct sunlight, and unstable plastics. The enduring appeal of the 1954D Lincoln Wheat cent comes from this tension between abundance and excellence. There were 251,552,500 struck at Denver, yet the population of truly elite survivors is dramatically smaller, and that is what keeps advanced collectors searching. PCGS describes the issue as common in circulated grades, with MS-64 examples still relatively abundant, MS-65 becoming harder, MS-66 scarce, and MS-66 Plus or MS-67 increasingly difficult to find. That progression explains why a collector might pay only a small amount for one 1954D and then compete aggressively for another that appears nearly identical to an untrained eye. One authenticated coin may sell for a few dozen dollars, another for several hundred, and an elite condition rarity can cross into the thousands. The documented $1,293 MS-67 red sale and the extraordinary $7,638 MS-67 plus red record prove that the market can reward exceptional preservation. But those results belong to exceptional certified specimens, not to every 1954D cent sitting in an old collection. In the end, the 1954D Lincoln Wheat cent is best understood not as a guaranteed valuable penny, but as a lesson in how serious numismatics actually works. The date tells you when the coin was made. The D tells you where. The alloy, weight, diameter, and design confirm its basic identity, but grade, color, luster. Strike originality, varieties, errors, authentication, and collector demand determine how far the coin can rise above its ordinary status. A circulated example may simply be an attractive piece of post-war American history, while a sharply struck red specimen with exceptional surfaces can become a significant condition rarity. The most dramatic verified auction result belongs to an authenticated MS-67 plus red coin, not to the typical 1954D found in circulation or an inherited jar. That distinction is the key to evaluating this cent honestly. If one turns up in your collection, the right response is not excitement over a number printed on the internet. It is careful examination, accurate attribution, preservation of the original surfaces, and professional evaluation when the evidence suggests something genuinely special. In that process, the humble 1954D reveals exactly why Lincoln Wheat cents remain one of the most enduring fields in American coin collecting. Step 3. There is something deceptively ordinary about a 1955D Lincoln Wheat cent. Hold one between your fingers, and it looks like exactly what it was meant to be. A 1-cent piece manufactured for everyday American commerce. Yet experienced collectors know that this particular date and mint mark deserve a much closer examination, because details that are nearly invisible to an untrained eye can separate a common survivor from a genuinely desirable specimen. The first thing to notice is not the color, not the shine, and certainly not an internet price estimate. It is the relationship between the date, the small d beneath it, and the overall condition of the coin. From there, the investigation becomes much more interesting. Later, we will examine the authenticated auction evidence, the recognized varieties associated with the 1955D, and the precise characteristics that can push an exceptional example into a completely different level of collector demand. The 1955D was produced at the Denver Mint during a fascinating moment in American history. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. The Korean War had ended 2 years earlier, and the United States was deep into the economic expansion that followed World War II. American families were purchasing automobiles, appliances, homes, and televisions at an accelerating pace, while manufacturing and consumer spending were helping define the culture of the 1950s. The Lincoln cent itself was already an established institution. Victor David Brenner's Lincoln design had been circulating since 1909, and by 1955 Americans had handled billions of wheat cents. The Denver Mint struck the 1955D primarily as an ordinary circulating denomination, not as a special collectible issue. Its job was to move through cash drawers, pockets, vending machines, stores, banks, and countless everyday transactions. That history matters today because every one of those encounters created opportunities for scratches, friction, discoloration, dents, and wear, leaving the best-preserved survivors as a very different category of coin. The production figure tells us just how substantial the issue was. 563,257,500 Lincoln cents were struck at Denver in 1955. That enormous mintage immediately eliminates the idea that every 1955D is rare simply because it is more than 70 years old. In fact, circulated examples are generally obtainable, and the real numismatic challenge begins when we ask how many survived with exceptional preservation. PCGS estimates roughly 55 million examples surviving across all grades, with an estimated 10,000 at MS-60 or better, and approximately 5,000 at MS-65 or better, although these figures are estimates rather than a literal census of every surviving coin. That distinction is crucial. Millions of survivors may exist, but the number of coins possessing the combination of high grade, attractive original color, clean surfaces, strong strike, and desirable eye appeal is much smaller. This is the foundation of condition rarity, and it explains why an apparently common date can become surprisingly competitive at the upper end. Now look closely at the physical coin itself. The 1955 D Lincoln cent measures 19 millimeters in diameter, weighs approximately 3.11 grams, and carries a plain edge. Its alloy is approximately 95% copper, with the remaining 5% composed of tin and zinc. That bronze composition is one reason these cents age so visibly. Fresh copper can have a vivid orange-red appearance, but decades of exposure gradually alter the surface. Collectors therefore divide copper Lincoln cents into three major color designations: brown, red-brown, and red. Brown examples have lost most of their original mint color. Red-brown pieces retain a meaningful portion of that original coloration, and red examples preserve the greatest amount of original red appearance. Color alone, however, does not establish rarity or value. A bright-looking coin may have been improperly cleaned or chemically altered, while an attractive naturally toned brown example can still be highly collectible. The serious collector studies the surface before thinking about the price. Turn the coin over and you are looking at one of the most recognizable reverses in American coinage. Brenner's obverse presents Abraham Lincoln facing right, with liberty beside his portrait, the date below, and "In God We Trust" across the upper portion. The reverse carries the familiar pair of wheat ears surrounding 1 cent and United States of America, with EPLURIBUS UNUM above. The wheat stalks were an appropriate visual symbol for an agricultural nation and gave the entire series its famous nickname, the wheat cent. By 1955, this design had already been part of American daily life for nearly half a century, yet the series was approaching its final years. The wheat reverse would continue through 1958 before being replaced by the Lincoln Memorial reverse in 1959. That gives the 1955 D an additional historical identity. It belongs to the closing chapter of the original Lincoln cent design, when the coin still looked almost exactly as it had generations earlier. Production quality becomes the next part of the examination. To create these cents, prepared copper alloy planchets were fed into presses where dies struck the designs into the metal under enormous pressure. A properly made coin should display clear lettering and strong definition, but the finished result could vary because of die condition, planchet quality, striking pressure, and other manufacturing variables. On a 1955 D, an experienced collector will study Lincoln's hair first, then the lettering and date, and finally the reverse wheat ears and central inscriptions. Soft detail can indicate a weaker strike, while strong separation and crisp design elements increase visual appeal. Luster deserves equal attention. Original mint luster is not simply shiny metal. It is the characteristic surface reflection created during the striking process. Rotate the coin beneath a light source and genuine original luster tends to move across the surface in a distinctive pattern. A coin that has been polished may appear bright, but will lack the natural character of an untouched mint state surface. This is where the financial side of the investigation begins to reveal itself, and the auction record provides a useful reality check. A normal certified 1955 D is nowhere near the legendary prices associated with the famous 1955 Philadelphia double die cent. In fact, documented sales of regular 1955 D examples can be surprisingly modest, even in high grades. PCGS records a PCGS MS66 Red Regular Strike 1955 D selling for $61 at Heritage in May 2024, while other MS66 Red examples have sold for $32, $35, and $52.95 in documented auctions. These results show why collectors must never value a coin from the date alone. Even a professionally certified MS66 Red can remain a relatively affordable coin because the regular issue has a large surviving population. A collector spending around the low hundreds on an especially attractive example may be buying quality rather than rarity in the strictest sense. The moment the coin carries a recognized variety or reaches an unusually high condition tier. However, the equation changes. One of the most important discoveries comes when the coin is examined for varieties rather than simply assigned a grade. PCGS catalogs several recognized 1955D varieties, including a double die obverse designated FS1, 1, and repunched mintmark varieties including FS503, as well as a D over horizontal D variety designated FS502. These are not imaginary internet varieties. They are cataloged numismatic distinctions that require proper attribution. The 1955 D double die obverse is especially interesting because collectors are looking for genuine doubling produced during the die-making process, not random damage or mechanical distortion that happened later. The repunched mintmark varieties are also connected to the historical production method of this period, when mintmarks were applied to working dies individually. If you see what appears to be an extra piece of a D, the correct response is not to declare a rarity immediately. Compare the feature with recognized diagnostics, use proper magnification, and consult a reputable attribution source or specialist before assigning a premium. The market evidence becomes more revealing with authenticated examples of these recognized varieties. PCGS records a 1955 D double die obverse FS1, a 1 graded MS66 red selling for $408 at Heritage in April 2019, while a PCGS MS66 red example with CAC approval brought $780 at Heritage in May 2023. Those figures show how a documented variety can move the coin into a completely different collecting category, even though the underlying date and mintmark are identical to an ordinary 1955 D. The repunched mintmark, FS503, also has a documented auction record. A PCGS MS66 red example sold for $1,900 in January 2023. That result should be interpreted carefully. It does not establish a universal value for every 1955 D with a strange-looking mintmark. It reflects a specific authenticated variety, grade, color designation, certification, and auction circumstance. A collector might encounter a 1955 D variety in the hundreds, while an unusually desirable certified example can approach or exceed the low thousands depending on competition and quality. The regular strike coin itself can become extraordinary when preservation reaches the highest levels. Heritage recorded a 1955 D MS67 red PCGS example selling for $6,325 in May 2005. The auction description called it fully struck, with bright cherry red color and strong luster, and reported that only 9 examples were graded MS67 at the time, with none finer at either major service. Another MS67 red PCGS example, with CAC approval, sold for $7,050 in April 2013 and was described as tied for finest certified. More recently, PCGS lists an $8,400 auction record for an MS67 plus red 1955D sold by Heritage on August 18, 2024. These results are important precisely because they are exceptional. They demonstrate that a coin with a mintage exceeding $500 million can still become a major condition rarity when almost all surviving examples fall short of the highest grades. A price in the thousands, therefore, belongs to a tiny elite population, not to the typical 1955 D found in an old jar or pocket collection. That distinction makes professional grading especially important. A circulated 1955 D can range from heavily worn through fine, very fine, extremely fine, and about uncirculated depending on the amount of detail remaining and the location of wear. Once a coin reaches mint state, the MS60 through MS70 scale becomes increasingly demanding. At MS63, small marks may still be visible. MS65 requires substantially cleaner surfaces and stronger overall appeal. MS66 demands an even more impressive combination of preservation, strike, luster, and eye appeal, and MS-67 represents an exceptional coin in which tiny imperfections can determine whether it reaches the next level. Red color adds another major factor for copper specialists. A coin may technically qualify as mint state while still carrying distracting carbon spots, stains, or unattractive tunning. Conversely, a naturally vibrant red cent with excellent luster and minimal contact marks can attract serious competition. This is why experienced collectors examine the entire surface under controlled lighting rather than relying on a quick glance or a seller's description. Authentication is the final safeguard against a costly mistake. Start with the fundamentals. Verify the date and mint mark, measure the diameter, check the weight, inspect the edge, and compare the design with confirmed genuine examples. The expected specifications, approximately 3.11 grams and 19 millimeters, are useful screening points, but they do not prove authenticity by themselves. Magnification can reveal suspicious lettering, altered mint marks, tooling, artificial color, or surfaces inconsistent with genuine mint production. The same caution applies to supposed errors. A genuine off-center strike, clipped planchet, broad strike, or other mint-made error can be collectible, but a damaged coin is not transformed into an error merely because it looks unusual. PCGS catalogs genuine 1955D varieties, including the FS101 double die and FS503 repunched mint mark, but any potentially valuable attribution should be verified rather than guessed. For a coin that appears to be worth hundreds or thousands, third-party authentication and grading provide a much stronger foundation than an unsupported online claim. Preserving the coin is almost as important as identifying it. Copper is unforgiving, and the surfaces you see today are the result of more than 70 years of chemical and physical history. Never polish a 1955D, never scrub away dark tunning, and never use household chemicals in an attempt to restore red color. Artificially brightened copper can lose the originality collectors prize most. Handle the coin by its edges, avoid touching the faces unnecessarily, and store it in an inert, archival quality holder designed for numismatic material. Keep it away from excessive humidity, heat, direct sunlight, and unstable plastics. If the coin is already professionally encapsulated, the holder protects both the surfaces and the authentication record. For raw pieces, a proper non-PVC holder is preferable to improvised containers. Long-term collectability depends not only on what the coin is today, but also on whether its original surfaces remain intact decades from now. The 1955D Lincoln Wheat cent ultimately demonstrates one of the most important principles in American numismatics. Rarity is often created by circumstances after a coin is struck. More than 563 million were made in Denver, yet the population becomes dramatically thinner as grade, color, strike quality, and originality improve. The ordinary collector may encounter a circulated example with little difficulty, while a specialist searching for a top-grade red specimen, a recognized FS1 double die, or a legitimate FS503 repunched mint mark faces an entirely different challenge. Verified sales illustrate every level of that spectrum, from ordinary certified pieces selling for dozens of dollars to recognized varieties reaching hundreds or low thousands, and finally extraordinary MS-67 and MS-67, plus red regular strike coins bringing more than $6,000, $7,000, or $8,000. Those spectacular results are not promises. They are historical auction evidence tied to specific coins. The real skill is learning to determine which characteristics your own coin actually possesses. When the date, Denver mint mark, surfaces, color, luster, strike, variety diagnostics, and authentication all line up, the 1955D stops being merely an old penny and becomes something far more interesting. A carefully preserved survivor whose story can be measured not only in years, but in rarity, condition, and the competition of collectors who understand exactly what they are looking at. Step 4, the 1958D Lincoln Wheat cent, is a fascinating example of how a coin can become historically important without looking extraordinary at first glance. Millions of Americans encountered scents like this one in ordinary commerce, probably never imagining that decades later collectors would study tiny differences in color, surfaces, strike quality, dye characteristics, and preservation to determine which survivors deserve serious attention. The small d beneath the date tells us where this particular scent was made, but it does not tell us how rare the individual coin is today. That question requires a much closer examination. As we trace this scent from the Denver Mint during the final year of the original wheat reverse through its life in circulation, and eventually into modern collections, we will uncover the characteristics that influence collector value and examine documented market results that demonstrate just how dramatically one 1958D can differ from another. The historical setting makes this coin even more intriguing because 1958 marked the closing chapter of the Lincoln Wheat cent design. The United States was in the Eisenhower era, the post-war economy had matured, and the nation was navigating the tensions of the Cold War. The year also sat near the end of an economic downturn that had begun in 1957, with industrial production and employment experiencing weakness before the economy began recovering. At the same time, American life was changing rapidly through suburban expansion, consumer manufacturing, automobiles, television, and new technologies. The Lincoln cent remained a practical piece of everyday money, however. Its purchasing power was small, but its circulation was enormous, and 1958 carried a special numismatic significance. It was the last regular year in which the famous Wheatear reverse was produced before the Lincoln Memorial design appeared in 1959. That makes the 1958D more than another late-series cent. It is part of the final production chapter of a design that had defined the American 1-cent piece for half a century. Denver produced 800,953,300 Lincoln cents, dated 1958, making the issue anything but scarce by original mintage. The D mint mark identifies the Denver Mint, which had become an important source of circulating coinage for the growing American economy. That enormous production number is the first clue to the real nature of this coin's rarity. You cannot simply see the date 1958 and assume scarcity. Millions survived, and circulated examples remain readily obtainable. The serious collector instead asks a more demanding question: how many survived in exceptional condition? High-grade survivors represent only a fraction of the original output, and coins retaining strong original red color, clean fields, minimal contact marks, sharp strikes, and attractive luster become progressively harder to locate. This is the phenomenon known as condition rarity. The original mintage tells us how many were made. The surviving population in a particular grade tells us how difficult it can be to acquire the quality a specialist actually wants. Before evaluating rarity, the physical identity of the cent has to be established. The 1958D Lincoln cent weighs approximately 3.11 grams and measures 19 millimeters in diameter, with a plain edge. It was struck in the traditional bronze composition of approximately 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. That copper-rich alloy is responsible for one of the most important characteristics collectors examine today: color. A freshly struck copper cent can exhibit vivid reddish-orange surfaces, but decades of exposure to oxygen, moisture, handling, and storage conditions gradually transform that appearance. Professional grading services classify copper Lincoln cents primarily as brown, red-brown, or red. The distinction matters because original red color is much harder to preserve than ordinary brown coloration, especially on a coin that spent its early life in circulation. But color must never be considered in isolation. A coin can appear bright because it has been improperly cleaned or chemically treated, while a naturally toned coin with completely original surfaces may be far more desirable to an experienced collector. The design gives us another way to understand why this particular cent occupies an important place in American numismatic history. Victor David Brenner's portrait of Abraham Lincoln dominates the obverse, with Liberty positioned beside the portrait, the date below, and In God WE Trust spanning the upper portion. On the reverse, the denomination and country name sit between two wheat ears, while EPLURIBUS UNUM appears above. The wheat stalks were an appropriate symbol for a nation whose economy and identity were still closely connected with agriculture, while Lincoln's portrait represented the president whose leadership during the Civil War had become central to the nation's historical memory. Brenner's design had remained remarkably consistent since 1909, making the 1958 D recognizable to generations of Americans. But this consistency was about to end. After 1958, the wheat ears disappeared, replaced by Frank Gasparo's Lincoln Memorial reverse in 1959. Consequently, every 1958 wheat cent carries the distinction of belonging to the final year of the original reverse design. Now imagine the coin as it would have appeared at the Denver Mint in 1958, before decades of handling could alter it. Prepared bronze planchets were fed into high-speed presses, where dies struck the obverse and reverse designs into the metal. The force of the strike had to be sufficient to bring up the intricate details of Lincoln's portrait and the wheat ears, while the planchet itself needed to meet the proper specifications. Dies gradually experienced wear, and individual coins could differ in sharpness because of striking conditions, die state, planchet quality, and other production factors. Today, collectors examine the highest points of Lincoln's hair, the lettering, the date, and the wheat ears for evidence of strike strength. They also inspect the fields for contact marks and disturbances. Original mint luster is particularly valuable evidence because it can distinguish an untouched surface from one that has been polished or otherwise manipulated. Tilt a genuine mint state copper cent under a light, and the luster should move naturally across the surface rather than appearing as a flat, artificial shine. Once the basic characteristics are understood, the market becomes easier to interpret. A regular 1958 D is not a famous rarity simply because it is a wheat cent, and its value can remain modest in ordinary grades. But the upper end of the issue tells a different story. PCGS auction records document regular 1958 D examples reaching significant prices when certification and grade become exceptional. A PCGS MS-67 red example brought $2,280 at Heritage Auctions in February 2023, while another MS-67 red PCGS example sold for $1,410 in January 2022. Those results show why the phrase 1958 D penny is insufficient for valuation. The buyer was not paying thousands merely for the date and mint mark. The premium reflected a certified high-grade survivor with the preservation, color, surfaces, and overall quality required to compete at the upper end of the population. A normal circulated coin is in a completely different market category. For a collector evaluating one today, the difference between an ordinary piece and a genuinely elite example can be measured in preservation rather than age alone. The next stage of the investigation is where the coin becomes especially interesting: varieties, diagnostics, and the possibility of legitimate mint-made abnormalities. The 1958 D has recognized die varieties that specialists study, including repunched mintmark varieties cataloged in major references. During this era, mintmarks were punched individually into working dies, creating opportunities for variations in their positioning or remnants of an earlier punch. A genuine repunched mintmark is therefore a historical production feature, not damage that happened after the coin entered circulation. Collectors also examine doubled design elements and other die characteristics, but caution is essential because machine doubling, scratches, dents, and circulation damage can easily be mistaken for true die doubling. The same principle applies to errors. A dramatic off-center strike, clipped planchet, broad strike, or other authentic mint error can command a substantial premium, but unusual appearance alone does not prove a coin was incorrectly manufactured. When a supposed variety or error could transform the value of a common cent into a major collectible, professional attribution becomes extremely important. There is always more to discover in American coinage, and the closer you look, the more fascinating the ordinary can become. That distinction between ordinary and exceptional becomes even clearer when examining high-grade market records. PCGS records a 1958D MS-67 red example selling for $3,840 at Heritage Auctions in January 2013, demonstrating that exceptional regular strike specimens can enter the several $1,000 range. Another MS-67 red PCGS example realized $2,160 in 2020. These figures are historical auction results for specifically certified coins, not universal price tags for the date. They also illustrate the psychology of advanced collecting. Once a coin reaches a very high grade, buyers are no longer simply searching for a 1958D. They may be competing for a coin that fills a registry set requirement, represents a top population grade, or offers unusually attractive color and surfaces. At that level, small differences become enormously important. A carbon spot, contact mark, weak strike, or dull area can separate one coin from another that looks almost identical to a casual observer. That is why the strongest collectors learn to evaluate the coin itself, rather than relying on the headline number attached to another person's example. Professional grading provides the framework for making those distinctions. Circulated pieces are evaluated according to the amount and location of wear, progressing through grades such as fine, very fine, extremely fine, and about uncirculated. Once circulation wear disappears, the coin enters the mint state scale, where MS-60 through MS-70 represents progressively higher standards of preservation. On a late wheat cent such as the 1958D, MS-65 can already represent an attractive collectible, while MS-66 demands noticeably cleaner surfaces and stronger overall quality. At MS-67, the coin must be exceptional in nearly every respect, and the red designation adds another layer because original copper coloration must be substantially preserved. Graders also consider strike, luster, planchet quality, contact marks, spots, and eye appeal. Importantly, numerical grade is not the entire story. Two coins sharing the same grade can command different prices because one has superior color and surfaces or stronger market appeal. This is where experienced collectors develop an eye that cannot be replaced by simply memorizing price guides. Authentication is equally important because valuable coins attract attempts at alteration and counterfeiting. Start with simple measurements, approximately 3.11 grams, 19 millimeters, and the correct bronze appearance. Then inspect the edge, lettering, date, mint mark, and surface texture under magnification. A suspiciously bright copper color, unnatural texture, tooling marks, altered mint mark, or evidence of polishing should immediately create doubt. Weight and dimensions are useful screening tools, but they cannot independently prove authenticity. The best comparison is always against confirmed genuine examples, especially when investigating a suspected variety. If the coin appears to be an important error, an elite-grade red specimen, or a recognized die variety, professional certification can establish both authenticity and grade. A certified holder also creates a documented record that is especially valuable when a coin enters the high-end marketplace. The goal is not to make an old penny look better. It is to preserve and document what is genuinely there. Preservation becomes the collector's responsibility once the coin has been identified. Copper reacts strongly with its environment, so storage conditions can determine whether a beautiful surface remains beautiful. A 1958D should never be scrubbed, polished, dipped indiscriminately, or treated with household chemicals in an attempt to restore its original color. Such treatments can destroy the very originality that advanced collectors seek. Handle the coin by its edges and avoid touching the faces with bare fingers whenever possible. For raw coins, use inert archival quality holders designed for numismatic storage, avoiding materials that contain PVC or other substances capable of damaging copper over time. Keep the storage environment reasonably dry and stable, away from excessive humidity, heat, and direct sunlight. If a valuable example is already professionally encapsulated, leaving it inside the certified holder generally provides the safest combination of protection and documented identity. Preservation is especially important for red copper because the original color that makes a coin attractive today can gradually change if the environment is poor. The long-term appeal of the 1958D rests on a remarkable contradiction. It is common enough to be accessible, yet rare enough in exceptional condition to challenge serious specialists. Its enormous Denver mintage means that ordinary circulated examples are not difficult treasures waiting to be discovered everywhere. But the population shrinks rapidly when collectors demand strong strikes, original mint luster, clean surfaces, attractive red color, and top certification. Documented sales demonstrate the progression. An exceptional MS-67 red can bring roughly $1,400 to $2,300 in one market environment, while particularly desirable examples have crossed the $3,000 threshold and reached $3,840. Those results belong to authenticated, certified high-grade survivors, not to every 1958 cent. The same principle applies to varieties and errors. A legitimate recognized variety or genuine mint error must be established before any premium is justified. For today's collector, that combination of final-year historical importance, familiar design, accessible entry point, and challenging condition rarity gives the 1958D a strong place in the Lincoln Wheat Cent series. More than 65 years after its production, the coin remains a reminder that the most interesting discoveries in numismatics often begin with nothing more than slowing down, turning a coin beneath the light, and noticing the detail that everyone else overlooked.